Hey everyone, RogueGold here. Welcome back to the Division 2, or should I say the Division 3. That's right, today I just wanted to quickly come on here and chat about some interesting Division 3 hires that have gone up recently. And this is notable because this is the first time in about a year, as far as I can recall, that we've seen them doing any kind of new hires for the Division 3 project. So this is mostly just going to be a little informal chat, but I wanted to go over the specifics of those hires in particular, some of the roles that are listed, and just talk about it in the greater context of where we think the project is at, also including things like the fact that Massive did have layoffs earlier this year. How does this play into all of that? We'll get into it, but yeah, I'll always take a good excuse to talk about more Division 3. I hope you enjoy it. If you do, and you want to stay looped in on all things Division 3 moving forward, then be sure to subscribe. Have to give a massive, no pun intended, shout out and thank you to our channel members. Thank you all so much for your continuous support on my journey on here and the content that I put out on the channel. But without further ado, let's get to it. Alright, so here we are on Massive Entertainment's website. Massive is, of course, the lead development studio on all mainline Division games, and over the past 18 months or so, they have been restructuring to scale up and handle full production on the Division 3. Interestingly, though, I want to say for about a full year now, they have had no job hires listed on their website. Now, we know in part this is because they already had a lot of people working at the studio. They were previously working on two AAA titles at once, that being Avatar, Frontiers of Pandora, and Star Wars Outlaws, and so following the release of those games and them shifting focus back to a singular AAA development title on the Division 3, that is at least in part what led to some of the restructuring and layoffs that we saw occur earlier this year. We'll circle back to that, but the point is, it has been quite a while since they have done any external hires, but as you can see here up in the top right, they have 10 current job listings. Now if we click on that, not every single one here is for the Division 3. For example, they have one here that is for Snowdrop, their in-house engine that the Division 1 and 2 run on. They also have two for Survivors, which is the upcoming Division 2 content. But as you'll note, the vast majority here are indeed for the Division 3. And this is exciting. Any indication that further movement or next steps are being taken on development is always a good sign. But there are a couple of interesting details that I think we can glean from not just these job descriptions, but also what jobs in particular are being hired for. So to start out, I opened a few different tabs of jobs that I wanted to look at specific details within their listing. The first one here, just because I assume that someone is going to see these listings for AI game designers or lead AI designers and figure, oh no, they are fully going all AI on Division 3. At least in this specific case, when they talk about AI, they're talking about enemy NPCs, right? The AI that goes into powering the opponents that we fight in the Division games. That's not to say that there might not be AI used somewhere in Division 3 development, and that is something that we should absolutely keep an eye on and be vigilant for, but I just wanted to clarify that in this specific case, they're talking about enemy NPC design. Then if we look at this next one here, the Senior Tools Programmer, even though this was essentially confirmed like a year and a half ago, and you could deduce it very easily from the job listings at that time, I've continued to see comments of people saying that they think Division 3 is going to pivot away from Snowdrop, which again is the in-house engine designed at Massive that was used for the Division 2. It's since been used for a number of other Ubisoft titles across their ecosystem, but despite that, I've seen a lot of people say, oh, Division 3 should or will use Unreal Engine 5 or other things like that. But again, even though it was kind of obvious that they would continue to use Snowdrop, this confirms it, right? This is a job listing for the Division 3. They say here your primary focus will be implementing and maintaining tools used in our in-house Snowdrop engine. So put two and two together. I'll let you all do the math. But then finally, probably the most notable new details that we can take from these listings comes from the lead game designer role here, and that is because it notes that this role will be behind driving the design and execution of key social and online features. Now, it may seem obvious that yes, the Division 3 is going to have an online base just like the Division 1 and 2 have, but again, I've seen a lot of speculation out there over the past few years since Division 3 was announced that maybe they would try and do a genre pivot for this third entry, make it more of a single player or narrative focus, less so than the online MMO style that we've seen the previous games use. And while this doesn't explicitly say MMO right here, it does seem very much like yes, Division 3 will continue like the Division 1 and 2 have to be social and online games. This person will lead the design and implementation of social and online features. They will drive the definition and development of the game's live structure, helping establish systems, workflows, and foundations required to support the game's live activity at launch and beyond. So yes, it very much seems as though the Division 3 will follow the same model and formula as the Division 1 and 2, which personally makes me very excited. That is exactly why I love the Division 1 and 2. But there you go. Those were a couple of interesting details there. Now, before we get to the final role that I wanted to look at, it is worth noting that a lot of these, pretty much every role actually that is listed here, is either a lead or a senior role on whatever project these are listed for. And I do think it's completely fair to say, well, why are we now hiring for all of these senior roles when we just laid people off from the studio back in January? Well, it's a bit of a tricky situation. Obviously, I cannot give you a definitive answer. I'm not behind the scenes there knowing how their employment structure works or how these layoffs were determined. But what we do know is that for the past many years, Massive had been structured for AAA production on 2 titles, those being the aforementioned Avatar and Star Wars. And aside from smaller teams at Massive right now working on Division 2, Production, and Survivors, as far as we know, the Division 3 is the singular large AAA title that is in production. And so naturally that means that going from 2 teams down to 1 means that there's going to be some amount of overlap between these roles that you've hired on for both games. Our understanding was that both the voluntary career transition program that they put in, basically saying if people wanted an out from the studio, then they could do that, as well as the actual forced layoffs that followed once they apparently did not get enough people for that program. In parts, that was done to eliminate redundancies in specific roles where they just had too many people for one job. And assumedly, in the past year, since we have seen Massive put up any job hires, again, this board has been completely empty for the past 12 months. It was assumed that amidst that restructuring and them transitioning projects, it was assumed that they reshuffled and promoted people internally to take on the new roles needed for this game. But again, now we are seeing them hire on a number of lead and senior roles. So if you want my take on why we're seeing all of this now or what this really indicates, I would say that this is likely indicative of the fact that the Division 3 team is likely pretty set in stone. They have all of their teams and disciplines filled out, and they're now doing this hiring drive to fill these senior roles that are needed in each individual team, likely because they're entering the full production phase of development. Now, that's not to say that they have not already been fully producing the game, but in-game development pre-production comes before full production, meaning that for the first year and a half, sometimes I think even 2 or more years of a project's life, a lot of time is spent on concepting, ideation, coming up with what you're actually going to do once you have the people to make the game. You do a lot of prototyping to flesh out those concepts. You do a lot of tech and engine work behind the scenes to make sure that the tools that you're going to use to make the game can support the vision that you want to execute. And again, that all circles back around to the idea that they develop Snowdrop, the engine that powers the Division 1 and 2 in-house, so they can make the exact tools that they're going to want to create the game that they want to create. And so all of that is to say that while I'm sure they have already been working on content for the Division 3, this is a good sign that they are now moving into the phase where all of that is laid out. The groundwork is set in stone, they've done the tech advancements that they need, and for the remainder of 2026 and likely a lot of 2027, they're going to be full steam ahead on producing the content that they want for the Division 3. Again, that is a completely outside guess, but that is my interpretation of what we're seeing here, and sorry once again to let down those of you who still think that we are getting this game in the next like 12 to 18 months, but I think this very much points to the theory that I've already held that the Division 3's release is going to be somewhere in the 2028 to 2029 window. But again, they're hiring on a lot of these senior roles. We know that they've already had 18 months or so with a lot of people in the studio working on this project. And so yeah, I think things are likely moving along quite nicely. The last thing then that I wanted to touch on, however, was this role right here of the animation director that they're hiring for. You may notice that every other role listed here is either a lead or senior role, but the director role is the obviously main person in charge of that discipline for the project. And what's interesting about this one in particular is that they already hired an animation director quite a while ago, or at the very least when the project was first going into development around late 2024, after Star Wars Outlaws had shipped. They had a few of these director roles listed on the website because again, that is one of the foundational roles that you need to have established from the beginning. I remember they had a narrative director listed. There may have been 1 or 2 more, but the animation director was another one that was on there quite early, but it was also one of the ones that remained open the longest. I want to say that it was one of the last hires to go off the board, again, around like a year ago from right now. And so I couldn't tell you what exactly is prompting them to reopen this listing. Did they hire somebody on who maybe just did not work out for the role and they're now wanting to replace that? Could it be that whoever took on the job just needed to depart for whatever reasons? Could be personal, family, who knows? games. I'm sure there's dozens of potential reasons for why they are now rehiring an animation director, but yeah, I do just think that it is quite interesting. Animation is one of those categories that I think just goes largely underrepresented and undervalued when people talk about production of a game. You know, I think back to The Division 1 and 2. When 2 came out, so many people said that it felt way more clunky than The Division 1 did, which was funny because if you put the two side by side, our characters, and this is before, you know, the introduction of the quick step and all that stuff in the current game, but for your base character models, you actually run faster in The Division 2 than you do in The Division 1. But I recall around launch, it was a huge discussion that people were like, I feel way more sluggish. This just does not feel as good as The Division 1 did. And that's changed over time. They made certain small tweaks. I know they added things like when you drop from a certain height, your character does a roll. They've made improvements that maybe don't make the current game feel like it did at launch, but that's why I think animation is just such an important discipline, because a game could be the most incredible looking on the market, you could have the best story we've ever seen in a live game, you could have all these things right, but if your animations are bad and it doesn't feel good to play, then that's gonna kill the enjoyment for so many people out there. One game that I'm blown away by anytime I see gameplay from it is The Last of Us 2. I don't know what's in the water over at Naughty Dog, but as far as third-person games go, they just have such a good understanding of how to do these like dynamic animations for different environments that the characters are in. And this is not me saying that I would want Massive or The Division to just copy what has been done by others, but I would love to see the boundary be pushed on how dynamic some of our animations could get in the Division games. I mean, just think about how many cover interactions we have, how many parkour elements with vaulting and jumping over obstacles. It's why I've said for a long time that I really enjoy the snappiness of the Division 1's movement in animations, but I love the fluidity the Division 2 brings when you can hood slide over cars and do quick cover-to-cover moves. So the bottom line is, for whatever reason they have to rehire an animation director now, I hope that it is because they're pushing for the highest quality bar possible in that discipline, because I think that is a very vital role that is key to making these games feel as addictive and fun as they do. All right, everybody, well, I've gone on long enough. That is your update on The Division 3 and the new job hires that have gone up for it. Again, this is the first that we've seen them hire for the game in about a year, so I felt it was notable to talk about. Plus, I mean, there's so little to talk about with actual Division 3 updates nowadays, so like I said, I will take any excuse that I can get. I hope you all enjoyed. I would love to hear your thoughts and takes on these new hirings. What do you think about all of these senior and lead roles being posted for The Division 3 and Survivors? Again, especially in the context of Massive just having layoffs a few months ago. What's your take on the reappearance of an animation director role? Again, given that was one of the very first ones that they ever did post for The Division 3. Let me know. I'll be very curious to hear what you're all thinking. That's going to do it for me on this one, though. Thank you all so much for coming by and watching. Hope to see you back soon. But until then, RogueGold. Ow. Oh! We just got a Ravenous! Haha! I might not be friendly. Let's go.
Coming to the Division 2.
Let's go.
And